Do you believe in angels? Get ready for a story that will shake everything you believe in. Imagine a man used to facing the impossible: fires, floods, accidents. Nothing surprised him anymore, until one ordinary day, a call took him straight into the unknown. What he experienced on that isolated river cannot be explained logically, nor can it be summed up in techniques or protocols. It was something that defied reason, science, and deeply touched his soul. A mysterious voice, an unlikely rescue, and a reunion that sealed a truth that many refuse to accept. Is there something beyond what we can see? You can't miss this exciting story. Are there angels among us? Patrick had been a firefighter for 17 years. During that time, his routine had been marked by extreme challenges: raging fires that turned forests into ashes, floods that swallowed entire streets, accidents on highways that required surgical precision to free victims trapped between pieces of wreckage. Nothing seemed to surprise him anymore. He had become an expert at controlling chaos, like someone who tames a wild beast with a simple look. But that Saturday morning, the call that came through the dispatcher had a different tone, and he could sense it even before hearing all the details. As he was checking some reports at the base, the radio echoed with the operator's deep, hurried voice. Code red. Water rescue. Minor. 12 years old. Missing. Location: rural farm near Rio das Pedras. Patrick froze for a second. It wasn't the first time he had answered a call like this, but there was something about the way the message was transmitted. Something difficult to explain, but impossible to ignore. He got up quickly and went straight to the equipment room. Every movement was precise, automatic, the result of years of training. He put on his wetsuit, essential for protecting his body from the cold and unpredictable waters of the river. He adjusted his flotation vest, checked the safety buckle, and set aside his diving mask, along with his snorkel and fins, essential for maintaining stability in the current. He also checked the floating rope, the rescue buoy, and the first aid kit, which included portable oxygen. Nothing could be missing. In a water rescue, the smallest mistake can be fatal, not only for the victim but for the rescuer himself. Before leaving, he checked the compressed air cylinder and valves, even though he knew that, depending on the river conditions, he might have to opt for free diving. The team followed him in silence. Each of them knew that this type of mission is always a race against time and against nature itself. The road to the farm was long and winding, with the vehicle moving quickly between dirt roads, sharp curves, and small bridges over streams that ran placidly, in contrast to the scenery that awaited them. Inside the vehicle, the radio updated the information. The boy, named Peter, had been last seen playing near the bank. He slipped and disappeared into the dark waters without even time to cry for help. Patrick listened to these words while his gaze remained fixed on the horizon. He knew that statistically, after 4 minutes of submersion, the human brain begins to suffer irreversible damage. 10 minutes is the limit for most victims. But he also knew, and this was what fueled his hope, that in rare cases, especially in children, hypothermia induced by cold water can reduce metabolism and prolong the chance of survival. These cases make headlines, are studied, and inspire those like him who never give up until the last second. In the distance, the sound of the river could be heard mixing with the wind. The terrain became more difficult, and the vehicle had to stop. The rest of the journey was made on foot, with Patrick and the team carrying the equipment along narrow trails, crossing tall grass and skirting makeshift fences. When he finally emerged from the trail into the open space, the scene before him made him stop for a moment. The riverbank was filled with farmhands, relatives, and neighbors. Their desperation was evident. Some people were silently weeping, others were shouting Peter's name as if calling him back to the surface. But what struck Patrick most was the river itself. The water, murky and dark, flowed with a silent, almost treacherous force. Broken twigs and leaves floated slowly, suggesting calm, but Patrick knew well that the surface could be deceiving. Below, there could be invisible whirlpools, unstable sandbars, or submerged logs, death traps for anyone, especially a child. The boy's mother approached, desperate, and could only point to a specific stretch of the riverbank while mumbling, "There, it was there." Patrick nodded, lightly touching her shoulder, and immediately turned to his team, indicating with quick gestures where they should position themselves. 2 firefighters stood on the bank, ready with the safety rope and support equipment. Another set up their ID rescue board. Everyone was alert, as they knew that the nature of that river would not forgive distractions. Patrick walked to the edge, feeling the muddy ground give way beneath his boots. The water was cold, and he took a deep breath before adjusting his mask and putting on his fins. He attached the guide rope to his flotation vest, ensuring that if the current was stronger than it looked, he could still be pulled back by the team on shore. He took one last look around, observing his mother's tense expression, the fragile hope in his father's eyes, and the empty gaze of the residents who, unfortunately, already knew the power of that river. And then he dove in. The impact with the icy water was immediate, but he remained calm, adjusting his breathing and controlling each movement. The current, as he suspected, was treacherous. From below, it dragged branches and leaves that hit his body, making visibility difficult, which was already almost non-existent due to the turbidity of the water. Stroke after stroke he advanced, using his feet to feel for possible irregularities on the bottom, and his eyes, protected by the mask, searching for any sign, a piece of clothing, an air bubble, any movement that would reveal Peter's presence. The underwater silence was disturbing. Only the muffled sound of his own breathing through the snorkel mixed with the discreet bubbling of the water around him. Each second seemed like an eternity, and the question that hammered in his mind with each movement was the same. Is there still time? As he searched with surgical precision, he knew he could leave no room for doubt or panic. All his training, all his experience was there, in that moment, tested to the limit. But what Patrick didn't know yet was that this wouldn't be just another rescue mission. It wouldn't be just a common call, just another one in his long list of completed operations. It would be the call that would transform everything he believed in, forever. And you? Are you ready to find out what happened next? If this story has touched you so far, don't forget to like it, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. That way you won't miss any of the next parts of this impressive journey. Take a deep breath, because what comes next will deeply affect you. Peter was only 12 years old, but to those who knew him, he seemed to carry a much greater light than his age might suggest. He was the kind of boy who made friends anywhere, curious, attentive to the details of nature, always with a big smile, the kind that could break the bad mood of even the most serious adult. At school, he was known as the boy who helped his classmates, who picked up those who fell during recess, and who never left anyone out of games. His eyes shone especially brightly when he was outdoors, exploring trails, climbing trees, or adventuring, as he had that day, along the banks of the river that ran behind the family farm. For the relatives and friends who gathered by the river on that tense morning, Peter was not just a child. He was a symbol of joy, hope, and the future. Everyone there had some memory of him, a joke he told, a help he offered, a prank that made them laugh out loud. So, when the news that he had disappeared into the dark waters spread through the community, it didn't take long for everyone to rush there, forming that silent and anguished circle of people who, more than anything, didn't want to believe what they were seeing. The circumstances were brutal and left no room for illusions. The waters were cold, the current was treacherous, and time, that implacable enemy, had already passed the limit that science usually imposes on human survival in drowning situations. Technically, everyone there knew the chances were minimal. Logic dictated that what Patrick would find would be just a lifeless body, another cold statistic of a tragic accident in a rural area. And yet, no one left there. Faith, however, is not made of numbers. It endures where reason gives up, and that was exactly what hung in the air that morning. A fragile, bruised, but still alive faith, sustained by the love of those who knew Peter, and by the irrational but powerful hope that a miracle could still happen. It was an invisible but palpable force that manifested itself in the clasped hands, the whispered prayers, the stares fixed on the muddy surface of the river. And in the middle of it all was Patrick. He was immersed, not only in those murky waters, but also in a whirlwind of emotions he couldn't explain. In all his previous missions, he had learned to create an emotional barrier, total focus on technique, attention to procedure, eyes on vital signs, a cool head. But now, something was different, profoundly different. As he searched the invisible bottom of the river, defying the current and his fatigue, Patrick realized that something was moving him beyond protocol. It wasn't just professional duty. It wasn't just another rescue for the weekend report. It was personal. He didn't know Peter. He had never seen him. But at that moment he felt an inexplicable connection, as if something inside him was telling him he couldn't give up, that there was still a chance, however small. Each stroke against the current was a battle not only physically but emotionally. His body wanted to stop, exhausted, cold, scratched by invisible branches. His mind said, "It's too late." But his heart, it screamed, "Keep going." And Patrick kept going, as if pulled by a force he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. He couldn't think about the body of a child that might be submerged and lifeless. He couldn't imagine the rescue scene that so many other firefighters had already done, and that he himself, unfortunately, had already performed on other occasions. No, at that moment in those cold waters, Patrick was looking for more than a body. He was looking for a life. He was looking for Peter, alive, and even without fully understanding where. This stubborn certainty, this rebellious hope came from, he dove deeper and deeper, searching every inch, fighting against the physical and emotional obstacles that surrounded him. What Patrick didn't know yet, and what you, who are following this story, will soon discover, is that that inexplicable feeling that made him move forward had a reason much bigger than he could imagine. If this excerpt moved you, don't forget, leave your like and answer me here in the comments. Have you ever felt that something pushed you forward even when everything seemed lost? Tell us a little more about that experience. 10 minutes had passed since Patrick had plunged into the relentless current, fighting against the invisible force that dragged everything in its path. The murky, icy water made every movement a brutal challenge, but he could not give up. His mission was clear: find Peter, and every second lost could be fatal. Then, in the midst of that silent chaos, a scream tore through the air and seemed to pierce the very liquid walls that surrounded him. Further back, Patrick. The voice sounded strong and determined, unmistakably that of his boss, who he knew was there on the shore, monitoring and coordinating the operation. For a brief moment, Patrick hesitated. The direction the order had indicated seemed unlikely. He had already scouted this part of the river, and everything there indicated that there was nothing but more current, more danger. His professional instincts, honed from years of rescue operations, screamed at him to keep going, where he believed he had the best chance of finding the boy. But at the same time, that voice sounded so sure, so incisive, that there seemed no room for doubt. And above all, he was under orders. He knew, like any good trained professional, that there are times when one must act before thinking, trust before questioning. Patrick questioned himself, but not the command. Why backwards? He thought quickly, as he turned his body and changed direction, swimming hard against the current. The water pushed his body as if it wanted to tear him away, but he kept his focus, moving forward in the direction that, seconds before, he would have considered the least likely. And then, as if an invisible thread had pulled him, his fingers touched something, a small, fragile, submerged body. His heart raced uncontrollably. He held on tightly and pulled it towards him. It was Peter, pale, still, but alive. There was still a faint heartbeat, a chance, a hope. Patrick could hardly believe what had just happened. The unlikely direction indicated by the voice had been the most accurate decision he could have made. Without it, he might never have found the boy in time. At that moment, he did not think about coincidences or miracles. He thought only about the competence of the boss, the precision of the order he had received, and the discipline that had taught him to obey even when everything inside him told him otherwise. As he emerged to the surface, clinging to Peter's fragile body, Patrick breathed heavily, overcome by an overwhelming mix of relief and adrenaline. He didn't know, yet, that the scream hadn't come from who he thought it was. But at that moment, he could only think of one thing. He followed the order, he did what he had to, and he saved a life. This is one of those moments that makes us reflect on the importance of trusting, of acting, even when logic points us in another direction. Sometimes, our immediate obedience to a command can be what separates life from death, loss from salvation. Were you also moved by Peter's rescue? Then leave a heart in the comments for this courage that inspires, for this life that won, and for all the times when hope speaks louder. With the help of the team, Patrick managed to bring the boy to the surface. The surface seemed distant, unreachable, but he broke through the water with force, pulling Peter's inert body out of that liquid prison. The noise of the current gave way to the frantic sound of the team's voices, who quickly began the resuscitation operation as per protocol. Chest compressions, artificial respiration, seconds that seemed more like hours. Patrick, panting, kneeling on the shore, felt his heart beating as strongly as it had never before in his 17 years of profession. And then, like a breath of life, Peter coughed. He coughed hard, expelled water, and then he breathed. His lungs sought air as if for the first time. Murmur of relief and disbelief ran through the team and the family members who watched everything from the shore. He was alive. Against all statistics, against all logic that Patrick had learned to respect, he was alive. But in that moment of victory, no one there dared to even ask, how? He had been submerged for almost 30 minutes, a time considered fatal in most drowning cases, especially in cold, murky waters like that of the river. It didn't make sense. Patrick knew the protocols, the statistics, the probabilities well. He had studied, trained, and often lamented the harsh defeats when bodies were recovered dead. But this time, faced with Peter breathing, there was something that no manual explained. Still with his chest racing and his muscles exhausted, Patrick turned to his boss. He needed to thank him. He needed to share the victory that, in his mind, had been shared by that precise order. "I was already giving up," he confessed, between breathless pauses. When you yelled for me to go further back, it was crucial for me to find the boy." But instead of the complicity he expected to find, the boss looked at him with a look of confusion, frowning as if trying to understand if the question had really been asked. "Patrick, I didn't shout. I didn't say anything." The tone was dry, firm, with no room for doubt. No one on the team shouted. Patrick froze. His blood seemed to freeze under his soaked skin. The sound of the river, which until then had seemed like a background, now sounded like a dull hum. He repeated almost voicelessly, "But I heard it. Of course. The voice called me." The boss shook his head, still looking around, perhaps to confirm that no one, other than the two of them, had spoken up. But no, none of his colleagues even knew what Patrick had heard there under the water. For a moment, Patrick wanted to argue, to reaffirm what he was sure he had heard, but when he looked around and realized that no one, absolutely no one, confirmed. Having shouted that instruction, he fell silent. It was as if the world had suddenly gone deaf and mute at that moment. Accustomed to giving technical, cold and objective reports, Patrick found himself, for the first time in years, facing an internal silence. Deep, disconcerting. The voice he had heard so clearly. Who was it? Where did it come from? Why was he, so trained to trust his senses, now faced with something that completely escaped his understanding? He closed his eyes for a brief second, searching his memory for every nuance of the moment, the tone of the voice, the strength of the command, the precision of the direction. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't the water playing tricks. It was real, and more importantly, it was the key to him finding Peter. Without that instruction, he would have given up or continued in the wrong direction, wasting precious time. And so, while the rest of the team dismantled the rescue apparatus and the paramedics rushed Peter to the hospital, Patrick stood there staring out at the water. The reflection of the trees on the surface seemed distorted, like the reality that, at that moment, he was beginning to realize might not be as simple or as limited as he had always believed. What explained that? Luck? An unconscious reflex? A hallucination caused by tension and lack of oxygen? Patrick knew he could choose any of these answers and move on, but deep down, something told him no, that wasn't it. What he experienced there transcended. This is one of those moments that makes us reflect. Is everything in life limited to what we can explain with formulas, manuals, and theories? Or are there moments so extraordinary that no human explanation can exhaust them? At that moment, even the most skeptical person has to surrender. It was a grand miracle. The boy survived 30 minutes underwater, and Patrick, the firefighter, received precise guidance that changed everything. And do you believe that sometimes God sends angels to give us that strength just when we need it most? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know your opinion that touches the heart of those who are watching. The atmosphere at the hospital was one of shock and disbelief. The medical team could barely hide their shock. Peter was alive, and more than that, he was fine. He had no after effects, no neurological damage, not even signs of lung complications after having been submerged for about 30 minutes. Just a few minor bruises, marks that were too small compared to the scale of the tragedy that everyone believed was inevitable. Patrick walked slowly to the room where Peter was hospitalized. Each step seemed heavy, not because of physical exhaustion, but because of the whirlwind of emotions that boiled inside him. He could still feel the cold pressure of the water, the current trying to carry him away, and above all that voice, the voice that guided him to the boy. He needed to see him, needed to understand who Peter was, and why the heavens had decided to intervene so clearly that day. Upon entering the room, his eyes found Peter sitting on the bed, hugged by his mother, surrounded by doctors and nurses who examined him and smiled in disbelief at this true miracle. As soon as he saw Patrick, the boy, even though weak, smiled full of life and extended his hand. His voice still weak but full of gratitude and innocence. Peter said, You saved my life. Thank you." Patrick felt his chest tighten. Those words, so simple and yet so immense, pierced his soul like never before. He had performed many rescues throughout his career, but never one so unlikely, never one that placed him face to face with the mystery of the inexplicable so directly. He held Peter's hand firmly, looked into the boy's eyes, and for a moment he couldn't respond. He just smiled, a silent smile but full of meaning, as if he recognized that day he wasn't just the hero, he was also the instrument. As the minutes passed, Peter began to tell his family and doctors what he had experienced down there, in that dark and cold place where, humanly speaking, he should never have survived. I wasn't afraid," the boy began, his voice slow, as if he were revisiting something very intimate and profound. "There was someone there with me. He hugged me. He told me, 'Oh, stay calm and help is on the way, as everything will be okay.'" Everyone in the room looked at each other, not quite understanding. Peter's mother held his hand tighter, while Patrick, standing next to the bed, felt his heart race again. "It was shining," Peter continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point, as if he were reliving that moment. "The water was dark, very dark, but I could see it, shining, calming me down." Patrick took a deep breath. He could no longer contain what he felt. There, faced with that pure and sincere revelation, he realized that Peter needed to know. He needed to understand that he had not been alone, not even before help arrived. With a choked but firm voice, Patrick then spoke. "Peter, I need to tell you something." The boy turned to him, curious. The mother and the doctors also fell silent, attentive. Patrick swallowed hard and continued. "Today, when I was looking for you, I was almost giving up. The current was too strong, and time seemed to have already run out." He paused briefly, staring at Peter. It was then that I heard a voice, clear, firm, that told me, "Go further back." Peter's mother's eyes widened. The boy frowned, attentive. "I didn't think, I just obeyed. I took 2 strokes in that unlikely direction, and suddenly, I hit something. When I touched it, I realized it was you." Patrick took a deep breath, trying to contain the emotion that was now overflowing in his voice. "Peter, that voice wasn't my boss's. It wasn't anyone on the teams. It was a divine voice." The room fell into absolute silence. Peter's mother put her hands over her mouth, unable to hold back her tears. Peter stared at Patrick, his eyes wide, as if he were now beginning to understand that in fact something much bigger had happened that day. Patrick then smiled, shook the boy's hand again, and with the certainty of someone who had witnessed the extraordinary, concluded, "You weren't alone. You never were. If this moment also touched you, leave a heart in the comments and share this story, because there are encounters that are not the work of chance. They are encounters marked by heaven." That day, in that small hospital room, time seemed to stand still. Everyone there was deeply touched. Peter and Patrick's story was not just a story, it was a truth etched into their souls, an experience that none of them could forget, nor did they want to. No words were spoken for a few seconds, just teary eyes, held breath, and racing hearts. Everyone knew with a certainty that needed no explanation that an angel had been there in that river. An angel had protected Peter in those cold, dark waters when all other chances had been exhausted. An angel who, in a mysterious and incomprehensible way, guided Patrick exactly to where the boy was, defying all logic, all protocol, and all survival statistics. There was no need for anyone to say, "That was a miracle." The miracle imposed itself, silent, present, pulsating within each one. Peter's family, overcome by an emotion that was difficult even to name, did what seemed most natural. They chose silence. They didn't want interviews or explanations. They didn't want to turn this into headlines or cold testimonies. No, What Peter saw and what Patrick heard were confined to that room, to the walls that witnessed a divine encounter, an inexplicable calling, an intervention that would forever change the course of the lives of everyone who was there. And how could it be otherwise? How could we forget Peter's gaze, still pale but illuminated, with the naturalness and purity of a child who, deep down, does not fear the inexplicable? He told me that everything was fine, that help was on the way, or the silent astonishment of Patrick, a trained man, accustomed to dealing with the worst of human nature and the brute force of the elements, who at that moment felt, for the first time in his life, something that did not fit into any doctrine, into any rescue manual. Heaven had spoken to him, and whoever was there that afternoon was never the same again. Patrick and Peter formed a bond that went beyond friendship. It was something deeper, a connection forged not only in gratitude, but in a shared spiritual experience that only they knew. For Peter, that outstretched hand in the darkness of the river became a direction for his life. He decided without hesitation, I want to be like Patrick. I want to save lives. And for Patrick, everything changed. The man who rarely prayed, who followed his routine with the necessary coldness of someone who deals with risk on a daily basis, began to end each day with a simple but meaningful prayer. May I continue to listen, if one day that angel needs me again. He knew, now he knew, that there is something beyond what the eyes can see, beyond what the senses can capture. And so, that story was not recorded in reports, nor was it a newspaper headline. It remained like a sacred secret in the memories of those people, in that small town that would never forget the day when the sky touched the earth and saved a life. Patrick never doubted again. Peter was never afraid again. And everyone who heard that story, even in whispers, even with modesty, knew an angel had been there. And you, have you ever stopped to think? Maybe angels are really among us. Maybe they manifest themselves in such subtle ways that most people don't even notice. Or maybe they reveal themselves, as happened to Patrick and Peter, in extreme moments, when all human strength has been exhausted and only divine intervention remains. If this story touched you, if it touched your heart, if it made you believe, or at least allow yourself to think that there is something bigger protecting us, then don't leave here. Subscribe to the channel now, activate notifications, and continue with us on this journey, because in the next video, you will learn another story about angels, and who knows, the next one might be yours. Click on the next video now, let yourself get involved.